Welcome to Memorial Day weekend in Montana. Hi everybody, John Pulaski with this edition of That's Montana. We are at Vista Point on the Beartooth Highway south of Red Lodge going into Wyoming. The highway isn't completely open yet on this Memorial Day weekend of 2011, but this show will contain segments talking about the building of the highway, as this summer it is the 75th anniversary of the completion of that long stretch of road from Red Lodge to Cook City, Montana, that climbs over 10,000 feet and also winds through Yellowstone Park and then comes back out into Montana. Bruce, you're a historian. You have tromped around the hills around Red Lodge for a good number of years. Take us back to the beginning of when Cook City was a mining area and Red Lodge was on the other side of the mountain, and they decided they wanted to connect the two with a road.
Right. Cook City people wanted a better road to get to their ores out as well as travel back and forth rather than going through Yellowstone Park, which had restrictions. And so there was a push from their side to get a road out somewhere. And of course Red Lodge wanted a road in because they wanted to be the center of that mining activity potentially to supply Cook City. And so several mining efforts were started in the late 1880s through early 1920s, but not much was done. There were some horse trails going up there and things like that, but nothing substantial enough to provide heavy traffic.
What finally started the ball rolling? There are a couple characters you've told me about that were involved.
Yeah. Dr. Siegfried was probably the principal one. He even built a road himself up Mount Maurice towards that direction. It was getting too much of an effort for him to build by himself. So he started a campaign with the federal government to get a road funded. He went to the editor of the paper, which was Shelley, and even funded Shelley some trips back to Washington, D.C. to try to get the road funded. And with the editor of the paper pushing this, and then Dr. Siegfried sort of funding some of the effort, they eventually got Congress to pass a bill in 1931. But that was passed over the objection of the director of the National Park Service. Finally, Senator Walsh from Montana said he was going to cut the funding to the National Park Service if he didn't agree to this proposal for this bill to build a road. So Albright finally gave in and let the bill go through. The idea started late in the 1920s. The federal bill was passed in 1931. That fall, they started surveying and a little bit of construction work, tearing down trees and things like that. First significant construction started in the summer of 1932, and the road was completed in 1936. The workforce at one time was up to 400 people on the highway. There were 3 construction companies, one Red Lodge Inn, one Cook City Inn, and one on top. And they hired together about 400 people. The average person earned 50 cents to $1 an hour. And if they stayed at the construction camps, they were charged $1 to $1.35 a day for food. Not high-paying money by today's standard, but they had a lot of workers because it was during the Depression.
Equipment, I mean, pretty primitive back then as far as the mountain terrain. Give us an idea of how that went.
Okay, the construction basically was the surveyors would go through about a week before where the road was going to go. So this is sort of a brute force engineering. There was not a lot of planning for this road. They then come through with steam shovels to knock out some of the big rocks and rough out the road, and then come back later with more fine-tuned equipment, hand shovels, to make the road more level, and then eventually gravel.
When did it get paved?
It did not get paved. It got oiled after World War II, but that was not really paved. It did not get paved until the 1960s.
And there was a jurisdictional dispute. It's been called an orphan highway, as I understand. Give us a little of the background of that.
Sure. When the original law and the presidential decree in 1932 declared it to be an approach road for Yellowstone Park, and therefore part of the park road system. And therefore it meant Yellowstone Park was really responsible for it. Yellowstone Park did not want the road because it takes money away from their budget, and it's not easy to maintain that long of a road, just maintain the oil, let alone the snow plowing. And so that's sort of how it started. Right now, Yellowstone Park is responsible for most of the road. The Shoshone National Forest has some, and the Gallatin National Forest has some. State of Wyoming wants nothing to do with it, although about 30 miles is in their state. Montana state did do the right thing, I guess. In the 1960s, 63 to 65, they took over the Montana switchback portions out of Red Lodge. And they were fully responsible for that now, and they've rebuilt it in 1963 to 1965, as well as maintain it today.
Let's talk about start to finish, mileage and elevation covered.
Okay. The Beartooth, the original highway was for 60 miles from the congressional action. That goes from the northeast entrance to Yellowstone Park down to 8 miles from Red Lodge. That covers from about 5,500 feet to 10,947 at the summit. The last 8 miles to Red Lodge, since it wasn't in the federal budget, federal law, they had the Forest Service and the state of Montana had to do that last 8 miles on their own. The original cost of the first 60 miles was $2.3 million, which is about $32 million by today's inflation.
After the personalities moved out of the way, the highway was given a name. Right. Tell us about that.
Okay, the name of the mountain range was originally the Snow Mountain Range, probably. And then it became, around the probably 1880s or 1890s, became known as the Beartooth Mountains. That's named probably for a bear tooth. Where that tooth is under historical debate, whether it was on Beartooth Butte or the spire that now exists with a sign on the Beartooth Highway. And so the highway got named after that. It had many other names over the years, including the High Road, the Red Lodge Cook City Road, which is probably the most popular during the 20s, 30s, and 40s. Many other names related to either the high road or the cities involved. Before the road was even open officially, during the construction, people would try to travel over the road. And those people came from all over the United States. So it has been a popular road with the United States public and even Europeans coming and going over the road. It probably had a much more economical impact in the 50s and 60s when there was still a railroad coming to Red Lodge. And then tourists would go from here over the Beartooth Highway to Yellowstone Park. And so a lot of traffic coming that way because of the railroad. Now you have private cars, people have the choice of which entrance to come in, and so there's a lot more probably diversity. Northeast entrance has the least of all the Yellowstone Park entrances. So the Beartooth Highway doesn't get that much traffic, but anybody that travels over it, by word of mouth, it spreads. What a fantastic road that is.
Folks, stay with us. That's Montana. We'll be back as Bruce shares more of the mystery of the Beartooth Highway. Mother Nature can be pretty capricious, and even though it's summer, a lot of places, sometimes on that highway, snow can cause closures. Give us some examples of how that's happened.
Snow can close at any month of the year. It tries to open Memorial Day weekend and then close whenever the first snow after October 1st usually. They don't plow it after that. But there's been a lot of spectacular and then minor closures. The two major closures probably have been in 1941 was a closure that stranded 75 people. It took 2 days to get them out of there, with people going in by ski to rescue the people from their cars, and drive as far as apart and bring them out. That took 2 days. In that incident, nobody was seriously injured. They just were stuck there for a couple of days in below zero weather. The other major time was 1947, when 58 people got stranded on top of the highway. It again took 2 days to get them out. At that event, the Yellowstone Park Service rescuers, 3 of them were in a pickup truck and went to sleep, and carbon monoxide killed them during the night.
Oh boy.
They were found the next morning. But generally speaking, as far as tourists go, they have all come out okay. The problem with the highway is 3 inches of snow up there can equal 3 feet of drift. And you get a lot of wind up there during snow, and so that can really close down the highway. These days it's a lot better because there's communications, and the maintenance crew can close down the highway as soon as they know that there may be trouble ahead. So the gate gets closed down here towards Red Lodge, so not as many people get stranded these days.
This year marks the 75th anniversary of completing and then opening the Beartooth Highway. How does that make you feel? What, in all the homework that you have done, what kind of feelings does that bring about?
The highway was built such brute force back in the 1930s, but to see it today, a more modern highway with access to all the natural beauty, as well as the experience of the switchbacks and the high altitude roads, just a fantastic, I think, event for Red Lodge and for the highway to be the 75th anniversary come this June of the original highway opening. As the celebration in Red Lodge is 2 or 3 days over that weekend that encompasses the fish opening a long time ago.
Any words of advice to people that may be a little apprehensive about going up that highway?
Take it slow. There's no reason to speed. You know, good speed is probably 35 miles an hour, if that. The other thing is stop. There's lots of turnouts. Stop and enjoy the turnouts and the views, the wildflowers. It's fantastic if you do that. If you just try to rush to Cook City, you know, it takes all the joy out of it, and you might get a little car sick.
Bruce, after all the homework that you have done and the research, what kind of a legacy do you think the Beartooth and the situation around Red Lodge will leave?
Since it's such a dramatic highway, and you get such great views of the canyons, lakes, as well as access to the Beartooth Mountains, which you can hardly get any other way. The legacy, I think, is opening up that nature to man. If the highway had not been built, as the superintendent of Yellowstone Park wanted, there'd be no reason to get access there. You could not build a highway today, you know, for anywhere near probably $200 million. So it would not get done, plus the environmental concerns. So I think the impact is it opened the mountains to individuals and therefore opened Red Lodge to, you know, an added tourist benefit as well as outside recreation.
Bruce, thank you, not only for this interview, but for all of the homework and research that you've done, putting together the story of the Beartooth Highway and the Red Lodge area, connecting it to Yellowstone Park, all the hard work that you have done. Thank you.
My pleasure. I really love the highway. It's, you know, been in my heart since at least 1959.
This
you know,
is a fully restored Yellowstone National Park bus. From Vista Point on the Beartooth Highway, that's Montana. I'll be right back, and I hope those are open. See you in a minute. As they can. John, you said about 4 years ago a group of you got together and decided to preserve a little bit of Yellowstone National Park as far as transportation was concerned. Tell us how this got started and what you've done.
Well, since I was a kid, I've always had a fascination with the old Yellowstone Park buses that you'd see various places around Montana. And we've noticed that they're starting to thin out. You don't see them so often. So a group of us that are passionate about the history and the old buses formed a group called the Buses of Yellowstone Preservation Trust in order to gather some of these buses and take care of them, restore them, and get them assembled in front of the public for parades and different events throughout the state.
We're in Red Lodge, whereas this is kind of your home base, as I understand, for this.
This is our home base, and we're very happy here.
That you are planning on doing some pretty impressive things with these buses as the Beartooth Highway opens up.
Well, we hope this spring, when they get the snow cleared, that we'll have the buses out to display them and give people an idea of what it was really like to tour in these old buses back in the day when things were just a little bit slower than they are now. In the early days, most of the people that toured the park came by railroad, Red Lodge being the last railhead open, to the last entrance to the park open. So the buses would come in and meet the people here and then tour throughout the park. You could go in any entrance and exit any other entrance to the park. So you could pretty much arrange your own tour. It was a leisurely pace. The buses did top end 30 miles an hour, but touring speed was probably 10 to 15. So you really had the opportunity to see the park, the real beauty of the park.
Where did the idea of this transportation system come from as far as the park is concerned?
Well, it started way back in the horse and buggy days when the road system started to develop. And then in 1916 they converted to motorized, and that's how the buses evolved from that period.
Share with us how the railroad wanted people to come west, obviously, and Yellowstone Park was a destination. What kind of a marketing strategy did they use?
Well, there were several railroads that serviced the park, had access. Northern Pacific, Union Pacific, Burlington, and the Milwaukee Road. and they all put up flyers and pamphlets throughout the United States and Europe to promote the park. It was a high dollar deal for the railroads in those days. Most of the people that toured the park obviously came by railroad because we didn't have private automobiles like we do now, or the highway system that exists. So it was quite a promotional, I don't know how you would put it, a big deal for those in those days to have these pamphlets and promotions all over the country.
Yellowstone Park's a pretty big place. Talk about the fleet size.
Well, when they started in 1916, they started out with 100 vehicles. By 1925, they built that fleet to just short of 400 vehicles. It was the largest privately owned fleet in the world at the time. And they just kept growing, kept it maintained. They used their equipment. Of course, the park was opened and just a few months out of the year, so the equipment wasn't used hard each year. But they had a very large transportation operation in Mammoth where they kept all this equipment. That burned in 1925, and they built a new facility in Gardner, Montana. And they kept a crew going year-round, maintaining, cleaning them up. If there were little scratches or dents through the season, that was all taken care of that winter. By the next season, everything was like brand new and ready to go again.
John, you told a story about a fire that destroyed a good number of the vehicles, but an amazing thing happened to replace those. Share that with us.
Well, this happened in the spring of 1925. At that time, the transportation operation was in Mammoth, and the motorized division occupied the old horse stables there. And a fire got started in the blacksmith shop and burned the entire building down. Through the hard work and heroism of some of the people that worked there, they saved many of the buses, but they lost about 100 vehicles. Harry Child, the owner of the transportation company, got on the phone the next day and called Cleveland and got a hold of Walter White, and he said, out here in Yellowstone we have a pretty serious problem. It's March and we just lost 100 vehicles. Well, Walter White put 2 shifts on and started building buses for the Yellowstone Park Transportation Company. And by May 15th, they had delivered 100 new buses to the park so that they could operate in full swing for the entire season.
Yankee ingenuity.
There was some real determination there.
John, as with any form of transportation, there are probably some pretty good stories come along the way. Did you share one or two with us?
Well, some of the old drivers I've had the pleasure of interviewing, and some of the stories that come forward are a lot of fun. One of the fellows that was an important part of the transportation company was Joe Giuntoni, and he was a local from Red Lodge. And the drivers referred to him as Payday Giuntoni, because he would wait for the drivers to bring their groups in at Tower Falls after coming over Dunraven Pass, and they had been trained to gear down so that their foot didn't touch the brake. He'd go touch the brake drums on the bus. If it was hot, it was payday. They were sent home right then.
Well, that was probably the first safety program then as well.
Well, they had an amazing safety record, and I would think because of people that thought like Giuntoni is the reason that the safety was as great as it was. And they had good equipment, efficient equipment. Most of the buses, actually all the buses in Yellowstone, were built by a White Motor Company out of Cleveland.
How long did this system stay in operation?
Well, they motorized the park. In other words, they converted from the horse-drawn or horse and buggy type coach to buses in 1916. And the transportation company is still running today.
Just new buses.
Just new buses. Actually, Xanterra Parks and Recreation is operating 8 restored or rejuvenated buses out of the 1930s that you can still get day tours on.
John, where do you find these old buses? And then give us an example of the shape they're in and how long it takes to bring them back to their pristine shape.
Well, that's a pretty loaded question, John. There's buses that you find, or pieces of buses that you find in various different places and conditions. Some of them we have found we call survivors. They're actually in running condition and need very little restoration, just a little bit of TLC. Some of them that we've found are down in gullies and farmers' backyards. They've been cut up and made into buck rakes or other implements to be used on the farm or ranch once they were discarded as buses. So we'll gather them. Maybe it'd take 2 or 3 different pieces to make vehicles, to make one bus. And we've been involved in some that have been in excess of 2,000 hours. So it can get to be a very involved project. They're solid equipment for the most part, but the bodies were made of white oak and skinned with aluminum sheet. So they're nailed together like an old-time coach. So you take them apart very carefully. Sometimes you're able to reuse the pieces. A lot of times the pieces that you pull off are just used for stencils to build new pieces. And so it all goes back together like a giant jigsaw puzzle, and it just is a little bit of history, a little bit of wood and nails, and there's a little romance involved in it too.
John, a lot of history has been gathered by your group. What kind of legacy do you project out there, or mission statement, if you will?
Well, I think the group of us that have come together and the families that own these vehicles that have put them basically in our custody to preserve and present is what we all have in mind, is keeping them visible to the public and in running condition so that people can actually see and get a feel of what the tour experience was in the old days when things move much slower than they do today. And our hope is that by doing what we're doing with the buses of Yellowstone Preservation Trust, that this will be passed on to the next generation to keep it going for more people to see.
John, thank you for keeping history in Montana alive.
You're welcome.
Well, that puts a wrap on kind of a chilly episode of That's Montana. From high atop the Beartooth, or sort of close to the top at Vista Point, we want to say a special thank you to the Montana Department of Transportation for helping us out and showing us what it's like to get this Beartooth Highway open for the summer season. We also want to thank Bruce Blevins for helping us out with the history of the construction of this amazing highway, and also John Mueller and all the folks that have put all the buses back in service for that Yellowstone Park system. And if we get off the mountain, join us on our website at www.thatsmontana.com and leave us a comment or two about the program on our Facebook page. We'll see you next Sunday on That's Montana.